All right, we're here. Back. We got the happy hour back. We're back for happy hour. It's been a while. It's been over a month, I think, since we've actually had a guest on the happy hour. So we'll welcome back Allison Knott from ANEW Well Sports Nutrition. Allison graciously had me talk to her group earlier in the week, and we had a nice little chat. It was pretty cool. Thank you again for giving me that opportunity. So tonight I think normally we kind of have Allison on and we just kind of talk generally about diet and whatever comes to mind. But we figured we'd do one with sort of a topic in mind, which Allison came up with. I thought was a great idea, which was fad diets. And with that, I'm just going to introduce Allison and let her kind of take it away and ask her, what would you consider a fad diet? And, name a few of the kind of common ones and the questions that you get surrounding that.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Thanks for talking in the group. It was awesome. I really appreciate it. So,
it was great.
yeah, that's the sports nutrition membership. So if anybody's interested, definitely reach out. So this is an interesting time actually to think about fad diets, because I don't know how closely people follow news when it comes to nutrition, but there have been quite a few stories recently about restrictive diets being called out in the news, and specifically some articles I know at least of one article that was in the New York Times about a diet that's been around for a while. And so I actually started thinking about what's the difference between a fad diet and then a diet that maybe is controversial, and how do you know the difference? And are there, things that you can look out for? Because I do think that there are a lot of fad diets that are maybe considered fad-ish at the time, but stick around and tend to have staying power and maybe even become successful long-term ways of eating for some people. There's also some diets that are fad diets that come and go and you never hear of them again. Some can be beneficial, some can be harmful, I think. But I try to always look at things from the positive side and figure out if there's something we could learn from diet. So that's kind of an aside comment. But I have kind of a checklist of what I would consider if you are wanting to identify something as a fad diet. So the first kind of thing that comes up in my mind when I am analyzing if something is actually a fad diet is the messaging is around the idea that everything that you know is wrong. So sometimes the diets will come out and they'll try to convince you that a food that is traditionally healthy is suddenly not healthy, or that this way of eating is actually making you gain weight. So those kinds of messages of trying to say, no, everything that you're doing is wrong, and this is the way that you should be doing it, and this diet is going to be the cure-all. I think that's one of the first big red flags of any fad diet. The second would be if it's a short-term thing. So I think about the 30-day, 60-day, 90-day approaches. Or there's one too that's going around right now that's 75 days. So so I think of those definitely fall into that kind of category. Diets that have the detox, cleanse, like removing toxin sort of language, or guaranteeing that they're going to do those things. So detox diets in general, I would consider those to be fad diets. Also, diets that require supplements. So yes, there's a place for supplements in some cases, but if a diet automatically comes along with a supplement, and taking that a step further, that diet happens to, or the person pushing the diet happens to sell the supplements that you need because you're on that diet, then that would definitely be a fad diet. And then one of the final things that I always consider to be kind of a red flag is the quick fix, or any kind of too good to be true sort of promise. So it's going to help you lose 10 pounds in 10 days sort of conversation. I think that in general, those sort of broad, extreme claims can be problematic and oftentimes very misleading. So that's the category that I put them in. And oftentimes I think fad diet comes with this negative mentality. And I'm sure everything that I just listed would make you believe that all fad diets are negative, but I do think, and I know that there was a question in the Facebook group about like a diet like Noom. So something that comes up that's new, but maybe isn't necessarily falling into that same category as a traditional fad diet, but is still considered potentially, because it's a new diet, people are still kind of questioning, well, is this actually something that we should be paying attention to or not? You know, it's something different than, say, these other eating patterns that have staying power, things like the Mediterranean diet, right? So you can have different levels and variations, I think is the best way to put it, of different types of diets.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. Yeah, even just when you were talking, it's funny. I thought of like remember the Atkins diet and
Oh yeah.
but you don't hear about that anymore, right? It's like not a thing anymore. No one uses that word. I mean,
Yeah.
people say cut carbs, but it used to be the Atkins diet, and now I don't hear. And I haven't heard that in years, I think.
Yeah. Well, and people, I think sometimes equate some of the conversation around like low carb, of course, is going more towards keto or ketogenic diets.
Which was one of the questions that actually Luigi was going to meet us here today, but he had to drive. He had to drive to Arizona, and unfortunately, he's not as comfortable as Denise, who drives every single day for hours and hours to get on the Zoom front in the car. But so Luigi's question was: is keto a fad diet, or can it be something that you sustain throughout your life? And it got me thinking to one of the things that you said, like. I mean, you would probably, I would say definitively, like something like veganism or vegetarianism, like that would not really be a fad diet. That's more of a lifestyle. Is that fair to say? And is keto kind of on that bubble for now, or?
Yeah, I mean, I guess fad diet could probably be defined in a multiple different ways. So I think of it as being some of those red flags that I mentioned, but also short term. So the ketogenic diet could fall into that. Yeah, it could also be a therapeutic diet that somebody follows for a longer period of time. For a lifetime is a different question, and is, if it's necessary, it's probably within a very small percentage of the population. I don't think that the ketogenic diet is something that somebody should be on for a long-term sort of approach, because I think the research isn't necessarily there to show us if it's actually going to be positive for our health to be on that type of diet for a long period of time. There's a potential that you could have negative outcomes from that. And I guess the ultimate goal would be, well, what is, or the ultimate question is, what is the reason for being on it? If it's purely for weight loss, then it might be worth investigating other ways to go about that maybe aren't so extreme. But I think the ketogenic diet, because of the fact that it was in the 1920s that it was started as a treatment for epilepsy for children, it's been around for a really long time, but for use in a very small percentage of the population. So maybe the way it's being used now, where people are doing almost like lazy keto is a thing, or like modified keto, some of these, diet ways of eating around keto that don't really have consistent definitions, that people are kind of interpreting them in different ways, that's more aligned with the fad diet than the ketogenic diet in a therapeutic clinical setting. That's a totally different conversation.
That's interesting. I'm definitely gonna make sure that Luigi checks out your answer on that. I know you gave some more information, so I'm sure he'll be interested to hear it. Angela asked another question. Oh, Angela just stepped away. But you did mention it. She had the question about Noom, and then she also mentioned. I'm going to take you off mute here, Angela, if you want to add to this. But she also mentioned something called Epicure, and I am unfamiliar with either.
I didn't know.
Huh? You
I
did
didn't
Noom?
know. Yeah.
Can you give me kind of like a brief overview of what Noom is or Epicure? I just have no idea.
So Epicure is new to me. I would actually be interested in, I don't know the answer to anything about Epicure, but Noom it's been around for a little while. I would say maybe 2 years, I think. And essentially what Noom is it's all virtual, but they work on, it's a weight loss and lifestyle behavior kind of change app that you get assigned a health coach, and they help you with meeting whatever your goals are when it comes to nutrition or weight loss. And there's a lot of education that goes into it. So it is my understanding that there's different topics that they cover on a daily basis, and that you get a group that you work with, and kind of there's a lot of support and more behavior therapy. So, you know, I don't have direct experience with it. I haven't, you know, seen the app in person or participated in it, but I've actually heard positives, and I've heard not so positive reactions. I think it is my understanding that if you, as with any diet, if you have any disordered eating history or eating disorder diagnosis in your past, it's not the direction that you would want to go. That's not an app that you would want to use. I've heard that there's potential that some of the calories could be maybe a little bit too restrictive. But I've also heard positives in the sense that it focuses on behavior change, and it helps you with understanding the why behind your food choices and why you're making the decisions you're making, and gives you that support. So I don't know that I would put Noom in the category of like traditional fad diets, because I don't think, you know, they're not making any of those extreme claims on quick fixes. They're not necessarily pushing any supplements. It's not a detox diet. Like, all of those kinds of red flags aren't necessarily coming up. But that's not to say that it might not be something that some people, especially with the disordered eating, would want to avoid. So, but Epicure, I don't know what that is. Angela, do you have?
Sorry. He's gonna get lost. I don't fully understand it, but it appears to be stuff that you can add to what you're already cooking, and it's supposed to help you in some health way. I didn't know. I was just asking because I have at least 3 friends on Facebook that sell it. So I see it a lot on my Facebook.
It's like an app. Okay. I thought it was like an app.
No.
Oh, okay.
So I'm looking, there's an epicure.com that there's meal plans and foods.
Yeah.
But it just looks like recipes. It doesn't really look like supplements. So I don't know. This might be
I don't
something.
know. It's really supplements. It's there's just something, because like they're like, I don't know, little bottles and packages that some people buy, and they share the pictures of it, and it's stuff that you can add, I guess, to whatever you're cooking. And
Yeah, you'll have to send me a link to it. I could definitely take a look at it. I would like to, I'm interested to know what's in it.
Yeah. Well, I tried Noom for a few months last year.
Oh, really?
I didn't even know. Did I know?
Yeah, he doesn't listen to me. Yeah, so I signed up. It was like a deal, and I got like 4 months out of it. The one thing that I always think about when I think of Noom is how they talk about eating water, like stuff that is water dense, as opposed to like dried fruit, because it's supposed to be, you know, like
Or filling or something?
Something like that. Yeah, more filling. And then there's a lot of sugar in dried fruit. That's the one thing that stuck out to me out of all the lessons. I do have to say, like, the daily lessons get a little overwhelming, especially since I miss some of them. You know, I have like a busy life. So when I fell behind, it got too overwhelming for me that I was way behind. And then there wasn't like a reset button. I would have to reach out to the coach and do it. So it was kind of annoying in that way, but I think that the lessons were pretty good.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting with something like that, because like there's not necessarily go at your own pace. It doesn't sound like, you know, like that option. So that makes it challenging, because that is probably one of the number one reasons why anyone finds that they can't sustain a certain way of eating, is because it doesn't fit within their lifestyle. And so when you know, that's the issue when it comes to prescribed diets that don't personalized to the person, or the meal plans that are just like cookie cutter meal plans that, you know, you can't just, there's not a one size fits all for nutrition. Everybody has different challenges. We all have different schedules, different preferences, different lifestyles. And so that as like an overarching, I think, just comment on diets in general, like some of these, especially fad diets, is that they're bound to fail, you know, because of those reasons. Because it's hard to sustain something where you have to mold your life to it versus you figuring out how to eat in a way that actually fits within your own personal day in and day out life. So yeah, I think it's also, I think sometimes when you get a lot of information thrown at you, such as in something like that it can be challenging.
It was fun. The facts were pretty cool to learn, you know, and they give you little quizzes.
Oh, that's cool. Like really interactive.
Yeah. And then, you know, like the psychology behind it as well. You have to write your goals. Yeah, it was good. When the trial period, you know, expired, I didn't want to sign up for the regular price. So, and you know what, quite honestly, I'd rather work one-on-one with someone. So, I mean, Allison and I work together, so I like one-on-one. Yeah.
I mean, I definitely think there's something to be said for having an individual one-on-one conversation, but I also recognize that that's not available to everyone. That's the reason why these diets and these things they exist, you know, one of the reasons why, I should say.
Yeah, which actually it's not a bad segue into my favorite recent topic, which is intermittent fasting.
Yes.
Intermittent fasting. This is my favorite Allison story recently. A friend of mine wrote me into doing some intermittent fasting. So basically 16 hours a day, I try not to eat. And I lasted for a good week. And then I just Allison helped me sort of revamp the schedule to fit my workout schedule a little bit better and still be effective. It's been pretty good. But I remember there was a part of, you know, they get into a little bit of detail beyond just the 16-hour fast. And one of the things they wanted, or they recommended you to do was that you could eat carbs and protein and fat and protein, but try to avoid carbs and fat at the same time, which was weird. So you could eat like a cheeseburger on a bun, or a hamburger on a bun, or a cheeseburger with no bun, but you couldn't eat the bun and the cheese. Like you couldn't have a grilled cheese.
I think it was the fat and
it was the fat and the carbs that you couldn't eat. So I mentioned that to Allison, and she said, you know, who told you you couldn't do that? And I said, well, it was the guy on the video with the abs.
With abs.
And she's like, Scott, do me a favor. Don't listen to the guy in the video with the abs.
Guy with abs does not know what he's talking about.
Well, that should be on your list, right? Guy with abs on YouTube should be like one of the signs of a fad diet.
Yeah.
But I'd love to get sort of your perspective, because I think we found, not that necessarily. I mean, I think it probably still qualifies. You know, if you just take it by the rules.
I thought intermittent fasting wasn't a diet. I thought it was like a scheduled time to eat. That's
kind of a diet, right? I mean, is that another one that's kind of on the cusp?
I mean, you can eat anything you want within those 8 hours, right?
To a certain degree, not really, but.
Well, so that's what's fascinating about this, right? Is that intermittent fasting does focus on time more than what you're actually eating. So there's not a prescriptive diet per se. It's more about just don't eat in certain time frames. But with the caveat that when you are eating, it's a healthy diet by whatever your definition is of a healthy diet. And I know what my definition is, and it definitely, you know, doesn't include restricting your combination of carbs and fat and protein and trying to not eat those two together. But I think this is where intermittent fasting can get challenging, is that if you, let's say, are someone who has a tendency towards maybe it's a binge eating tendency or some way to make up for the time that you're not eating. So then when you are eating, you're kind of going in the opposite direction, or there's a disordered pattern coming up, then that can be a challenge with this way of eating. I definitely would not recommend any of these for anybody who has any kind of disordered eating pattern. But I know that intermittent fasting is something that has some interesting research behind it, that there is, especially when it comes to even with your circadian rhythm and potentially with certain times of day and when you're eating and when you're not eating, you know, that there's a potential that it can really help. But I think we have to think about what's the definition of success, and usually it's weight loss is what people are thinking is success when it comes to any diet. But what I like to say is we also need to think about what is the diet giving you, so what are you actually eating during the windows that you are eating, and we need to make sure you're meeting your nutrient needs. And like in your case, Scott, it really is important that you're fueling your workouts and you feel good during your workouts and you have the proper recovery after. So, you know, but ultimately, I think when it comes to intermittent fasting, a lot of the success is potentially around, especially, well, in free living people, maybe not necessarily in with the studies, because the studies are obviously going to be controlling a lot of the calories, or they're hoping to control the calorie intake. But in a lot of people who are doing intermittent fasting, they're also cutting back on calories, which is the reason for the weight loss. It's not, I mean.
That's, yeah, and I think we came up with that.
Well, I was a little disappointed with my results because I gained weight while Scott lost weight. And we were eating exactly the same thing. But that's just.
But you're different people.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. So your calorie needs are different than his calorie needs. So, and it's also true that men tend to, especially, so let's say, I'm just going to make up numbers. So let's say Scott was eating 4,000 calories a day and suddenly with intermittent fasting is eating 2,000 calories a day. But let's say without intermittent fasting, Stephanie, you were eating 2,500 calories a day, but then, or let's say I did the math wrong. Let's say you were eating 1,500 calories a day, but then you started eating exactly what he was eating, and that led to you eating more calories, you know, then yeah, that's going to definitely have an impact on your weight. You're different. You require different things and different nutrients in different quantities. So, you know, it's a really good example of like there not being a one size fits all. But I do think that, you know, with intermittent fasting, it's one of those, I don't think I'm going to consider it to be a fad diet, but I have reservations. However, I don't consider my job to be, you should never do this. I consider my job to be, if you're going to do this, let's talk about how you can do it in the healthiest way possible. If that is possible, if it exists. And I think it exists with intermittent fasting in some cases. So
you know what's interesting, and this is and Nick commented here in the group chat, and you guys are free to comment in the group chat unless you're driving, James. But that intermittent fasting, by not eating for 16 hours in a row, that it sort of teaches you, and it sort of inadvertently, to just learn that you're going to be hungry sometimes. You can go 16 hours without food and not die. And that sometimes being a little bit hungry is okay. And, you know, we live these lives now where we have food everywhere. It's always available
home all the time.
Yeah, 24/7. And if you kind of just give yourself carte blanche to go to the pantry every time you're hungry, and you're sitting around the house all day watching TV or whatever, you could really do some damage. I think so. I think, you know, Nick's point is kind of interesting. It's almost like, you learn, I would say, you know, I want to say they're good habits to a certain degree, you know, and to what we talked about when you just talked about calorie counting. You know, I typically stop eating around 5 or 6 o'clock, which means I'm up from at least say 6 o'clock to 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock whenever I go to bed, and I'm not eating. Mm-hmm. And what do I normally eat in those hours? I eat snacks, desserts, ice cream. We might open a bottle of wine, mm-hmm. or have, you know, crack open a beer or something. It's all stuff that's not conducive to losing weight. And so it's almost like inadvertently, by following the rules, you develop some good habits. Is that one way to look at it?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and you could easily say that a lot of the benefit to this is by what exactly is what you're talking about, of if those times that you aren't, by definition of the intermittent fasting, you're not allowed to eat, And that's also the time that you tend to choose higher calorie, higher sugar, foods that are also, or potentially alcohol, or things that are going to lead to you making different food decisions than what would be aligned with your goals. Then definitely, but it's probably that in and of itself, it's not the intermittent fasting by definition. Do you see what I'm saying? So it's more about the fact that you're shifting your eating pattern and also eating less, and maybe even focusing on, I don't know, because we haven't talked about the specifics necessarily of day in and day out what you're actually eating during that window, but it could also be that there's changes to the foods you're choosing during the time that you are eating. And so all of that works together to help to contribute to, if the ultimate goal is weight loss, it does help to contribute to that. But I think that also can be accomplished without intermittent fasting, but sometimes people do, and this is one of the positives I would say of any diet, is that structure can sometimes be helpful for people, especially as like what Nick was saying, if you're starting to relearn or almost like recalibrate how you're thinking about food in a way. So if you think that hunger as an example, so you bring up the point of the fact that our eating environment and our food environment in modern life is filled with opportunities to choose convenient, high sodium, high sugar foods on a very regular basis. And we could be exposed to foods where we're consistently eating throughout the day, and we don't have those gaps of times where we are experiencing hunger, and we get used to the idea of just either never being hungry, or in some cases, people will go the opposite extreme and kind of ignore their hunger until they can't ignore it anymore and they're ravenous, and then they, maybe find that they feel out of control around food. And a lot of this ties back to some of the principles and concepts around mindful and intuitive eating, which, however people are getting to that point is, I think, very beneficial, because we tend to unlearn those things throughout our lives. We get used to ignoring hunger, or, really not listening to body cues around food. And so if the intermittent fasting is helping somebody identify that again in some way, then yeah, maybe that's a good thing. So I don't think we're at the point where we can say intermittent fasting is the way to go. Like, I don't think we can say that, but I think that there's some interesting research, and that there's potential that it could have positive effects for people for a lot of the reasons that you're mentioning, Scott, that maybe are just associated with the practice of intermittent fasting and not necessarily, a result of intermittent fasting itself.
One thing that I did notice is I have a lot more energy on the days that I fast in the morning. Usually, when I was doing regular eating pattern, right, I would get up, eat, and then feel tired, like lay on the couch. I don't want to sign into work, kind of tired. But with the fast, it's the opposite. I have a lot of energy. And I remember about 2017, was it, when we did bikini? Yeah. So 2017, we did the bikini diet, and that's actually the opposite of intermittent fasting.
I looked real good.
The opposite of intermittent fasting. It was like you had to eat every 3 hours, and I just felt like crap all the time. Remember, I was moody. But this one, nothing happens to this one. So
that was an ultra low calorie diet though, right?
Yeah, it was like eating leaves and
well, her last week, I think she ate 5 times a day, but it was 3 ounces of fish and asparagus, and now she can't eat asparagus ever again.
Or fish.
Yeah, I mean, wow. Yeah. See, so I mean, in that definition, it doesn't matter how often you're eating, it matters about the total calories you're consuming. And it sounds like with that, anybody would be moody and hungry.
Well, not this
She was
one.
Tolerable. I didn't do the last few weeks. I didn't need the bikini part of the bikini diet. I was training for Ironman, so I couldn't. I was like a month or 2 away, so I couldn't be that calorie deficient.
No, but at the beginning, when I started eating clean, as they call it, right? I had the keto flu or whatever they call it, like that flu-like symptoms. And this one was fine, and I'm over here dying. So.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I mean,
yeah, go ahead.
I think it really, when it comes to any kind of way of eating, obviously meeting your energy needs in a way that is going to support you without going on an extreme restrictive diet is always the way to go. And so even with something like intermittent fasting, I kind of think that coming up, the next thing is really going to be the combination of some of the diets and like diet patterns, such as even like keto mixed with intermittent fasting. Like, I think that's kind of the direction some people are going. I hope I'm wrong, because then I think you're really creating like a perfect storm of some challenges when it comes to potentially causing some real damage to just your relationship with food and how you eat and enjoy food. So we'll see. I think intermittent fasting, I did some recent, I'm actually doing a talk on this at the end of the month. And it's interesting to look at like the Google Trends. I don't know if you ever look at Google Trends, but you can search by the words that people are searching in Google. And intermittent fasting over the last like 10 years, it's like flat, and then suddenly it just spikes, and it's just continuing to spike. And of course, every diet spikes like every year in January. Like, people are always looking at it. So it's like doing a lot of this, but like it's just up and up and up. And intermittent fasting, I mean, I think we're nowhere near the peak of it. I feel the same way about intermittent fasting when it comes to how much I'm hearing about it as I did about keto 2 years ago. The ketogenic diet was like all people could talk about 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And now it seems like intermittent fasting is on that path. So
we'll see if it sticks, I guess, long term. So a question from Denise was, and it's actually interesting because it's a word I hear it from time to time, but I don't hear a lot of people getting into it. So I'll ask you from a macro perspective too. Will intermittent fasting slow down your metabolism? And just in general, when it comes to metabolism, is there anything like in a general sense that you can tell us about things that speed up and or slow down metabolism?
Yeah. So metabolism as a word, and I think in the diet conversation, tends to be highly misunderstood. Your metabolic processes are 24/7, right? So it's not something that you turn on and off. And our control over our metabolism is extremely, extremely limited, in meaning that you cannot, it's not like you can eat a certain food or, do a certain exercise that's going to quote unquote boost your metabolism. So there are things that you can do that might have an impact when it comes to like body composition changes. But by and large, the majority of our metabolism is something that is what it is. So like your basal metabolic rate, so that's just what's required for, or it's like resting energy expenditure is another way to put that, but it's essentially your calories burned when you are not doing anything. It's just to keep the car running is kind of how I like to describe it. So just what is required, what energy is required to have you have a heart that's beating and lungs that are breathing air, right? So that's the majority of our metabolism. And then you add into that things like your exercise expenditure. So how much energy are you burning with exercise? That's where we have the most quote unquote control over metabolism, is by exercise, because we're burning calories obviously when we're exercising. And then there's just activity of daily living. So that's just like, are you sitting at a desk all day, or are you somebody who has a job that you walk a lot, or you're doing activity? So that's another component. And then the final would be what's called the thermic effect of food. And so this is where you get some people kind of saying things like, oh, if you drink cold water, it's going to boost your metabolism because your body has to heat it up. And it's like, well, no, like maybe by like a few calories, but no, not really. But the thermic effect of food is just essentially the digestive process. So you require energy to digest food. So when we talk about like slowing down our metabolism, I think what people are confused about is they think that they're going to have a significant impact on something like that resting energy expenditure, when in reality, it's really, it's not something you have too much control over unless you're in like a severe starvation, you know, which could potentially happen with ultra low calorie diets. You could create this environment where your body starts to modify how it's using calories in a way for survival. But in general, we don't have too much control over it. So that's my really long-winded answer of just like the basics of metabolism. When it comes to intermittent fasting, I've looked into this a little bit, and I don't know that there's actually a true impact on metabolism. The only thing that I could think that might have an impact would be just like the thermic effect of food portion, because you're not eating, you know, within significant time frames. As long as you're meeting your calorie needs during the time window that you are eating, then most likely it's not going to have any kind of negative impact on metabolism. But you have to remember too, ironically, as you lose weight, technically your metabolism decreases because you have less body size, so you require less energy. This is a good example of why somebody who is 5'2" versus 6'5", who is a female versus male, body size and the body composition, that all plays into how much energy you burn every day. So if you are someone who loses 10 pounds, then your total daily calorie need decreases because you have lost weight and you are a smaller person and you don't require as much energy. So, I don't think it's something we necessarily need to worry about, but I would definitely let you know, because this is a topic I'm interested in researching a little bit more about, but the whole phrase about, you know, messing up your metabolism or having a slow metabolism is pretty much, unfortunately, kind of overblown. But if you want to change your metabolism, so I know that was one question that you brought up, if you want to have any kind of impact, I would say body composition does make an impact. So having more muscle can help with burning more calories throughout the day. It's just the way it is. This is also another reason why men tend to change weight rapidly and women don't, because men have more muscle mass. That's just one of the differences than women do. So, yeah.
Gotcha. A good question from Denise too is if you're, it's actually thinking about, you know, fasting. If you're a diabetic, is that not a good idea?
I would not recommend it because of the fact that, especially, well, it depends. I mean, actually, no, I wouldn't recommend it. Especially if there's like medication that you're taking, or if you need to inject insulin, it's not something that I would recommend. I think in general, anyone with chronic conditions that could potentially have an impact on like their blood sugar, or I think even also in some cases with things like heart disease or kidney disease, these diets should definitely be something to proceed with caution around, and talk to a dietitian or doctor directly to make sure that it's safe if you do decide to go in that direction. Sound good? All right, perfect. I see a thumbs up, so that's good.
So we did have some questions that were a little bit off topic, I think, that came in. So I figured I'd throw them out to you, unless let me throw it out to the group first before we move on. Does anyone else have any questions about, it doesn't even have to be intermittent fasting. I know that's kind of taken over the conversation a little bit, but do you guys have any other questions? I mean, like I know we didn't mention paleo. I know that's another one that's kind of been out for a few years that people have been trying from time to time. Does anyone else have any comments or questions for Allison? Elena.
Yes.
Hey, so I know with that 75-day diet, that weird thing, one of the requirements was drink a gallon of water a day. So I would like for you to speak to the amount of water consumption, electrolytes, and how much that can very much mess you up. With a lot of people who train, right? So having just your water versus putting salt supplement in there, drinking a Powerade, something like that, because a lot of diets are pushing heavy fluid intake also. So just if you could speak to that.
Yeah. It's like, I think that one of and Elena, you probably saw my Instagram rant on this. So it's 75 Hard is the name of it. And I had a series of stories a couple of months ago talking about this. So the idea about drinking water, I think, is just one of those old things. It's like a core component to most diets is drink water when you're hungry, you know, or drink a certain amount of water instead of eating. It's always in place of eating. You know, if you just drink water, oh, you're hungry, you must be dehydrated, you should drink water. And it's like, no, actually, I'm hungry, I'm not dehydrated, thank you. And I think that when you have these arbitrary numbers around the quantity of water that you should be drinking, that is concerning, because, like, with all the conversation we've had, we all have different needs and we're all a different body size. So while a gallon of water for somebody like Scott might be just fine, a gallon of water for somebody who is much smaller or older, or who has a different activity level, or who, you know, is also consuming other beverages that are contributing to their water intake, like all of these things might be an issue. So yeah, I think that there's that blanket kind of statement isn't necessarily the best way to go about giving hydration advice. Also, you mentioned electrolytes. So, you know, all of us know, if you're in this group and you're an active person, then when you sweat, you lose electrolytes. And so you need to replace those. Most people, if they're exercising for an hour or less, they can just drink water and that's fine. They can get the electrolyte replacement from food. But anything that's like in that endurance time frame, hour and a half or plus, we need to look at replacing electrolytes. And I don't know that that diet specifically calls that out, although that diet requires, I think, you exercise for 90 minutes. Is it 90 minutes twice a day? Yeah.
Wow.
So the expectation is that you exercise 90 minutes twice a day. And if they're not giving any kind of guidance on using some sort of an electrolyte beverage, then, you know, it's concerning. So,
Yeah, what was,
good point.
what was the diet that we did that was 30 days?
That's Whole30. And that's a lot like clean eating, which I read an article about people who are now like really obsessed with clean eating to the point where they're like really harming their, you know, emotional well-being.
Orthorexia.
Yes, thank you. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's a really real problem. And something like Whole30 demonizes foods without having any true science to back it up. Like, there's no science that says beans are inflammatory. Nothing. And in fact, diets that include beans as a part of course, in a broader, healthier eating pattern, are shown to be associated with positive health outcomes. I mean, beans are not inflammatory. And that is one of the most challenging things about some of these diets. They just randomly eliminate, as a blanket statement, foods for a random amount of time. I mean, honestly, 30 days is a random amount of time. It is, because we're just measuring it off of the months in the calendar, right? And most people are doing it in January. How many days are in January? Aren't there 31 days in January? So why isn't
it 31? 31.
Yeah.
All 31.
Yeah, so maybe that gives them the first. They get New Year's Day to not do it. Everybody starts it on the 2nd. That's probably where that came from. And then that's why it's 30 days, I bet.
Yeah,
so,
you tweeted the other day something about, you know, maybe if your diet makes you start all over again, if you screw up. And I thought that was like a wink and a nod to Whole30.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and 75 Hard. It's the same. Yeah, because it's crazy to me to think that we have these, I think, well, it's crazy to me to think that our bodies somehow know it's been 30 days, like, and then what? That's the next thing. But then the other thing that's crazy is that we are punishing ourselves if we do something human, which is, you know, enjoy our beans. Like, to think that if you ate beans, as an example, on Whole30 and you had to start over, I mean, that's crazy, right? Not to mention, like, birthday cake.
Yeah.
You know?
What I noticed with the Whole30 and with the bikini diet, especially, because with the bikini diet, I lost 17 pounds, like, very quickly. But I gained it all back and more after a month, like literally after a month of normal eating, not even crazy eating, just normal eating. I gained plus some.
Yeah.
So, and with Whole30, I've noticed that too. Actually, I've noticed with Whole30, especially eliminating like butter and well, actually, can you have butter? I don't think so, but eliminating the dairy and stuff.
Yeah.
When I reintroduce it, you know, not thinking about it because now I'm off the diet, let me go party, or, you know, let me go eat and treat myself, is very, very bad for me, like stomach wise, you know, bathroom wise. And
Yeah.
wants to go through that, you know. So.
Yeah. Well, and I think you speak to something like with the weight cycling that's so key too, because there is research that shows that this up and down, up and down, up and down is not healthy. It can have damaging effects. And so this gets into the conversation about why these diets can have long-term negative impacts. It really should be about sustaining a pattern of eating and a way of a healthy lifestyle for your life. It shouldn't be about short-term fixes that are going to reduce your weight, and that's the only way we're measuring success. And in general, I think that's one of my biggest complaints about any diet, is that we only are focusing on the number on a scale, when really we should be thinking about what else is the diet giving us. So, like, I like to remind people that your healthy diet isn't built on the food you take away. It's built on the food you add. That's truly what makes a healthy diet. And so we focus so much on what we're eliminating that we forget to think about what we're actually adding and what those foods that we're adding are actually doing for our health. And if our only measure of success is a number on a scale, then we're really missing a lot when it comes to our total health, mental health and physical health. Because you could be at a stable weight and never have a change in your weight and have a shift in your eating and see metabolic impacts that are positive. And I would argue that in most cases, those are going to have more of a long-term effect on your health if you sustain them than a number on a scale will, because you can also be within a smaller weight frame or range and be metabolically unhealthy. You know, so there's no magic to the number on the scale. It's just, it tells us one tiny little piece about our health.
Yeah, so I think actually these last two comments, I'm going to try to tie them together. So Denise mentions that she tried the grapefruit diet, the zone, cabbage, slim fast. She thinks she just doesn't know how to eat, and she's on Weight Watchers now. And then Nick's comment was, as a nutritionist or a dietitian, are you tired of debunking the new diet? And so I don't know if there's a way to tie those in, since it looks like Denise has tried everything. Denise, I think you got to join. I think you got to join Allison's group sessions, because I think you would benefit a lot from those. I know I just talking to her one-on-one, like I've learned a lot over time, and it's something that when you get in the conversation more and more often, I feel like you just kind of, you grab onto certain things and you take them as you go. And I feel like that just talking to Allison over the last couple of years. So we should talk about that. But to answer the questions, I guess, are you tired of debunking the new diets, and what should Denise's approach be?
So I don't think tired of debunking is the right word. I feel like it's more just, to be honest, it kind of bums me out. You know, it makes me, I get really, I'm empathetic. And so I get very personally, I feel very frustrated for people who have an experience like what Denise is describing. because I don't believe that we as just living human beings should be struggling to enjoy our food. I believe that food is so much more than just nutrition alone, and that everybody should have the experience of living a life that allows them to enjoy their food and not think about it 24/7 and not worry about it. And I think these diets just continue, it's like ruts in a road of like continuing to ingrain just really, really toxic messages around food. And we hear them over and over again. And there's high level themes with all of them. Not all, but most of them, like the diets that Denise describes, they tell you certain foods are bad and you can't eat them, and certain foods are good and you should eat those. And then you just get stressed when you're eating the whatever the bad foods are according to the diet. And I just don't believe it should be that way. So I don't get tired of it, but I definitely feel like I wish that there was a different conversation around food, because I think it's just so important that people are able to find this place where they can enjoy food and also feel really good and feel healthy and feel energetic and, you know, not get stressed out every time they eat. That's my ultimate goal as a dietitian. Anytime I work with anybody, is that whatever it is, I want that person to find a place where they feel their best while eating foods they enjoy. They don't feel restricted, and they feel empowered to make food decisions without having to have a strict meal plan or prescription or, you know, diet that's saying you can't eat this and you can't eat that, you know? So I don't know if that helps, but I think there's a lot of confusion around nutrition, and we do have a food environment that can be challenging, because oftentimes the foods that maybe don't make us feel our best are the ones that are the most convenient, and it can sometimes be more expensive in some cases. And I think food access is a real issue, and you know, we have a lot of challenges in the food environment for sure. I don't think it's impossible, but the diets don't help. You know, they're not helping all of these other layers of problems that we experience in our food environment. So it's just, you know, I think people who are behind some of the diets maybe have good intentions, but there's a lot of unintended consequences with them, which is what Denise's experience is describing you know, if you have done that many diets, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Denise, but I'm assuming that there's probably some consequences for how you feel about food or your relationship with food that have resulted from doing all of those kinds of diets. I don't know if you want to talk to that at all. I don't want to put you on the spot, but yeah.
I think
I see the comment from Nick.
this is something we briefly touched on earlier this week, right? Was sort of just the mental angle of how you look at food. And I think, you know, you kind of, you know, sort of like what you get to eat. Like there's such a negative tone when people talk about eating and diet. It's always like, you know, I can't eat this because I got to lose weight. I can't eat this because I got to be healthier. I can't do this. And then especially now, and Denise's training lately is just, she's on fire. Her last 2 months, she's been on fire. And I think if she could learn, as opposed to looking at as what can I eat because I don't want to gain weight, if she could learn how to look at it as what do I get to eat so that I can be faster, so that I can run further, so that I can, you know what I mean? Like that kind of thing. I think that if she had some guidance in that direction, and this is, you know, so we talked about the mindset before, but I think if she could get some guidance on that aspect, I think it would benefit her greatly.
Yeah. I mean, I had an interesting conversation the other day where we were talking about apps and how a lot of the apps put so much emphasis on things like calories, right? It's only about calories and meeting your total calorie intake. And you don't really see any apps that look at eating I say this constantly, but like the patterns of your eating, what's here that is are you getting enough of these essential nutrients or the nutrients of concern, which would be the most commonly under-consumed nutrients in the American diet? Things that, it's not about calories. It's more about it's the nutrient density that can have more of an impact in a lot of cases than calorie density. So relearning how to think about, the pattern, what your plate looks like, what those nutrients are, what they're giving you also, but then layering on top of that, the enjoyment factor, the sustainability of you in the sense of you being able to sustain that way of eating. All of those things play a role too. And the goals that you have, like you're saying, with you're eating these foods to help fuel performance in a way that you feel good, if it's all about, if it's all about the restriction, then you're really missing a lot of, the reasons why you eat, for sure. So I could go on and on and on about all this. I'm over here talking just nonstop. You guys need to interrupt me so I can not talk your ear off.
No, I think you've been very helpful. And I also think, one of the other things to note too is for someone like Denise is learning to eat, what to eat after a workout, like after she has a long run tomorrow, she's got to do 7 miles. So what kinds of food, and we've talked about it before, but what kinds of food should she be eating to benefit her, but in that window after? Could you just speak to that briefly? And also beforehand, if she wakes up in the morning and she's going to run, what can she squeeze in? I mean, I know the answer is because we've had these conversations, but what can she squeeze in beforehand that won't necessarily get her running to the bathroom all the time? That's like every runner's fear. But will give her some solid energy for her run. Yeah.
So the beforehand is the focus in on the carbs, especially if you are running first thing in the morning. So if you're not getting a meal in, if you're doing like a mid-morning run and you've had breakfast or something, then mixing it up a little bit more with carbs, fat, and protein. But the closer you get to the exercise, or if you're doing it first thing when you wake up, then really trying to get some quick digesting carbohydrates within the hour before. It's hard to say if a certain food is going to cause GI distress. So that's definitely different for everyone. But I think in general, a good guideline is to focus on the quick digesting, meaning that it's not high in fiber. So this is a good time to choose lower fiber fruits, lower fiber grain products. So you might not necessarily want to have oatmeal the hour before you run, but you could easily have, an English muffin or 2 pieces of toast that aren't necessarily really high in fiber. But some people do well with oatmeal before they run, and it's not a big deal,
I tell them to eat oatmeal.
Well, I mean, it depends. It depends on the person. You might, if you're eating oatmeal and you do well with it, then great. If you're going from never eating before exercise to suddenly eating oatmeal, it might not be the best. But it really is a trial and error. There isn't a right answer, but the common theme is that you're getting in the carbs before. So I typically recommend it depends on how soon before your run that you're eating, but I do recommend that you get at least 30 grams of carbs, 15 to 30 grams, but try to get 30 grams in the hour before. And you can increase that pretty significantly as you start to plan for longer training sessions. So, but these are all just general recommendations, and definitely want to make sure that you, are thinking about your individual needs, and it could also be impacted by what else you've had to eat. So if you're exercising later in the day, then that total quantity of carb might need to change, depending on what you've eaten during the day. So after, I like to think about what I would call the recovery R's. So that would be restoring fluids that you've lost, refueling with carbohydrate-based something, and then repairing with protein. So you're getting in a good mix of protein and carb, plus you're replacing the fluid that you've lost. So this might be a smoothie, that gives you all of those things, because you're getting in some fruit. If you add a protein source into the smoothie, then that's going to help with checking that box. And then you're getting the liquid as well, because you're usually using like water or juice or something. Or it could be Greek yogurt topped with fruit and water.
She got the protein.
Or it could be, so there's the protein. I would venture to guess that probably doesn't have very many carbohydrates in it. So you might want to add, a banana or something to eat on the side. But again, this all does go into your own needs. 4 grams, is that what you said? You're on mute, so I can't hear you. Yeah, so I mean, it's definitely going to be individualized for your own needs, for sure. But the carbohydrates will help. It helps just with ensuring that not only you're replacing glycogen, but it also does help with but like you want to get enough energy and calories in for the protein to be used to repair muscle. But it's mostly about the glycogen, which is the stored glucose.
And you know what, those were actually the questions that we had that were submitted that were a little bit off topic. So we've actually somehow drifted the conversation to that naturally. So
that's good.
Good segue. Good job. So I'll other than Nick's comment about any diet that that says asparagus and Brussels sprouts are forbidden is great, but
I'm with you. Asparagus.
But if anyone else has any other comments or questions, or else we can probably wrap it up at this point. Here we go. All right, I appreciate all you guys showing up for tonight. Allison, thank you so much. This has been really informative. Again, every time you come, I feel like I learned something new.
Yay, I'm glad. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and you can find Allison over at it's ANEW Well, ANEWWELL.co is the website. Her membership is like a great deal. It's like, what is it, $15?
$15 a month.
$15 a month.
2 live sessions a month. One with me, one with an expert, so like a Scott or another dietitian, or so there's a couple of different sessions coming up I'm really excited about. And then also a lot of resources and new things added weekly, and we have a private Facebook group. So yeah, it's a good time.
Yeah, you got a lot of good stuff going on over there, Allison. I appreciate it. Appreciate your time. I know you're always willing to kind of give us a hand.
Yeah, I'm happy to always talk about food anytime.
All right, so we're going to wrap it up there.